It was a quiet evening at one of the most exclusive luxury restaurants in the city, the kind of place where the rich and famous dined in privacy, far away from the prying eyes of the world. But what no one could have known was that the most important guest that night wasn't just another high-profile celebrity or business mogul. No. The real twist of the evening came when a young woman named Karoline Leavitt sat down for dinner, unknowingly about to face an insult that would change the course of her night and ultimately leave the waiter in an extremely uncomfortable situation. Why? Because Karoline wasn't just a guest at the restaurant, she owned the place. The restaurant had been carefully designed to ooze elegance and exclusivity. Located in one of the most prestigious neighborhoods of the city, its ambiance was the perfect blend of luxury and warmth. Fine art adorned the walls, each piece selected to evoke thought and conversation, while soft golden lighting cast a warm glow over the polished marble floors. The space was designed to create an intimate, welcoming atmosphere, one where guests could forget the world outside and immerse themselves in an unparalleled dining experience. Every detail, from the carefully selected tablecloths to the carefully curated wine list, spoke of sophistication. The scent of rich French cuisine lingered in the air, filling the senses with the promise of decadence. Each dish was carefully crafted by world-class chefs, ensuring that every bite was a feast for the senses. The waiters, highly trained professionals, wore crisp uniforms that were always immaculate. They moved through the space with precision, gracefully handling the needs of every customer with the utmost care. Each interaction was a delicate dance, one designed to make guests feel like royalty as they dined in this rarefied environment. It was the kind of restaurant where people came to feel special, to indulge in a moment of luxury, and to escape from the stresses of their everyday lives. Guests could relax here, knowing they were in good hands, knowing that their every desire would be met with a smile and a quiet, competent service. It was more than just a place to eat. It was an experience, one that wrapped diners in a cocoon of luxury and tranquility. One evening, Karoline Leavitt walked into the restaurant as she often did, but this time it was different. Unlike other nights, when she would sometimes stay hidden behind the privacy of her usual table, she wasn't just a guest at the restaurant. She was the owner. But not many people knew that. Karoline was a woman who preferred to blend in with the guests around her. She was tall, in her mid-30s, with striking blonde hair that framed her face and a presence that was both confident and approachable. She moved through the restaurant with ease, her movements graceful and measured, as though she had been a part of the restaurant for years. She appreciated the finer things in life, but she wasn't one to flaunt her wealth. She didn't want to be the center of attention, and that suited her just fine. Not many people knew who she was, at least not on a personal level. In business circles, however, she was well known for her impressive success. Karoline had worked tirelessly over the years to climb her way up the ladder, building a name for herself as a shrewd, capable entrepreneur. After years of hard work and dedication, she had recently taken full ownership of the restaurant. It had been a dream come true for her, a dream that was born from years of ambition, effort, and sacrifice. The restaurant was a labor of love, and it meant the world to her. Every plate served, every glass of wine poured, was a testament to her hard work and vision. Karoline had always been passionate about food, about hospitality, and about creating spaces where people could come together and share moments of joy. Owning the restaurant was more than just a business opportunity. It was a way for her to bring her passion for the culinary arts and hospitality to life in a tangible, meaningful way. The restaurant wasn't just a place to dine. It was a place where people could experience something special, a place where every guest could feel valued and appreciated. She poured her heart into making it perfect, from the menu to the service, to the overall atmosphere. For Karoline, it was the culmination of everything she had worked for, but despite her ownership, Karoline had always preferred to keep a low profile. Most of the people who dined at the restaurant had no idea who she was. She enjoyed the anonymity, the ability to sit back and enjoy her meal like any other guest, without the pressures or expectations that came with being in the spotlight. She liked blending in with the crowd, enjoying her food, and savoring the experience without drawing attention to herself. It allowed her to experience the restaurant in a different way, without the weight of leadership or the constant eye of scrutiny that came with being a successful business owner. That evening, Karoline entered the restaurant just like she always did, wearing a soft smile on her face and a quiet confidence. She nodded to the host, who greeted her with a warm welcome. She exchanged a few pleasantries with the staff, all of whom knew her well, and made her way to a quiet corner of the restaurant. The table was already set, the candles flickering softly in the evening light. It was the perfect spot for a peaceful dinner alone, and Karoline felt the familiar sense of calm wash over her as she sat down. She had grown used to the luxurious surroundings, to the soft clinking of glassware, the murmurs of conversation, and the rich smells of food wafting through the air. But that night, something felt different. As she settled into her chair, she couldn't help but notice how the place had come to symbolize so much of who she had become. The restaurant was more than just a business to her. It was a reflection of her values, her hard work, and her vision for the future. She ordered a glass of wine, choosing one of the more refined selections from the menu. As the waiter brought her drink, their conversation was polite but brief. She appreciated the quiet efficiency of the staff, who knew her preferences without needing to ask. She knew that for many of the guests, this was an escape, a rare opportunity to indulge in something extraordinary. But for her, it was an opportunity to reflect. In the soft light of the restaurant, she could finally relax, away from the demands of running a business, away from the expectations of the outside world. As Karoline looked around the room, watching the guests enjoy their meals, a sense of contentment washed over her. She had built something special, something that not only reflected her vision, but also brought joy to the people who came through the doors. It was a quiet pride she carried with her, knowing that the restaurant had become a place where people felt valued, where they could savor both food and experience, where they could forget about the world for a while and simply be. But as she sipped her wine, little did she know, the evening was about to take an unexpected turn. That night she would face an insult that would test her ability to maintain her composure. And it would all begin with one mistaken assumption. As Karoline settled into her table by the window, she couldn't help but appreciate the quiet elegance of the restaurant. The soft glow from the golden lighting bounced off the polished wood and marble floors, casting a serene ambiance that allowed for moments of reflection and relaxation. She gazed out of the window, enjoying the view of the city lights in the distance, and inhaled deeply, savoring the calming atmosphere. This was her sanctuary, a place she could step away from the constant hustle of managing her businesses and the world's expectations. Here she could just be herself, enjoy a good meal, and escape into the beauty of simplicity. She was greeted by a waiter she had never seen before. His name was Jason, a young man in his late 20s who appeared eager but slightly nervous. His eyes darted around for a moment as he approached the table, trying to maintain his composure. Karoline noted his neat uniform and sharp appearance, a clear reflection of the restaurant's high standards. "Good evening, madam," Jason said with a bright smile, though it carried an air of uncertainty. "May I get you started with some drinks?" Karoline returned his smile, her voice warm as she replied, "A glass of Chardonnay, please, thank you." Jason nodded and walked away to fetch her wine, clearly eager to make a good first impression. Karoline settled back in her chair, still feeling the soothing energy of the restaurant. She flipped through the menu, taking her time, letting her thoughts wander. She had visited this restaurant countless times before, but tonight was different. Tonight, she wasn't just another customer. She was the owner, quietly observing the inner workings of a place she had poured so much of herself into. It was one of the few times she allowed herself to take a back seat and enjoy the fruits of her labor. Moments later, Jason returned with the glass of wine, setting it delicately in front of her. He seemed a little more relaxed now, though his eagerness to impress was still evident in the way he hovered around the table. "Here you go," he said, setting the glass down gently. "Would you like to hear about the special of the day?" Karoline, as always, was curious about what the chefs were preparing for the evening, so she nodded. "Please," she replied. "I'd love to hear about it." Jason's smile grew as he launched into his pitch. Our special tonight is a dry-aged steak served with a side of roasted vegetables and a rich red wine reduction. It's one of our best dishes, though I should warn you, we've had a bit of a quality issue with the meat lately," he said, looking slightly uneasy but trying to cover it up with more enthusiasm. "It's been a bit inconsistent, so I'd recommend going with something else on the menu instead." At first, Karoline didn't think much of the comment. As the owner of the restaurant, she understood that some dishes were more difficult to perfect than others. But then, Jason added something that caught her off guard, something that went beyond mere concern for the food. "And honestly," he continued, a hint of condescension slipping into his voice, "I'm sure you won't be able to handle the portion size anyway. It's a bit much for someone like you, don't you think?" The word struck her unexpectedly, and for a moment, Karoline froze. She felt a surge of irritation wash over her. The comment wasn't just about the food, it felt personal. Jason hadn't made a professional observation, nor had he politely made a suggestion. He had passed judgment on her, her size, and her supposed ability to handle a steak portion. Her eyes narrowed ever so slightly as she processed the implication behind his words. Who did he think he was, she thought. She wasn't some helpless diner who needed to be looked after, especially not by a waiter who clearly had no idea who she was. Karoline owned this restaurant. She had put in countless hours to get it to where it was today, and she had worked harder than anyone to ensure that the space was a haven for everyone who entered. Jason, clearly assuming she was just another wealthy customer, hadn't even considered that she might be the one who had shaped this establishment into the luxurious dining destination it was. He didn't know that she was the person responsible for creating this space where people came to escape, relax, and indulge in the finest experiences. But Karoline didn't react immediately. She took a deep breath, choosing to keep her composure. She smiled softly, though the smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and decided that she didn't need to make a scene. She wasn't going to stoop to his level by calling him out on the spot. Instead, she chose to let the moment pass, determined to enjoy her meal and her time in the restaurant. She had learned long ago that it wasn't worth engaging with every petty person who tried to push her buttons. Instead, she would simply show him and herself that she was better than that. "I'll go with the salmon instead, thank you," she said, her tone calm and collected, though the undercurrent of tension remained. She wanted to show him that she could handle the situation with grace. Jason, seemingly oblivious to the discomfort he had caused, smiled enthusiastically. "Excellent choice. The salmon is always a crowd pleaser. Let me get that order in for you right away." As he walked away, Karoline took a deep breath and allowed herself to relax. Why had that comment bothered her so much, she thought. It wasn't like she hadn't faced criticism or judgment in her career before. But something about Jason's dismissiveness stung. She was used to being in control, and in that brief interaction, she had been reduced to a stereotype in his eyes. A wealthy woman, possibly unaware of the finer details of dining, not fit to handle the larger, more luxurious portion of the menu. Karoline raised her glass and took a sip of wine, feeling the cool liquid settle her nerves. She was in control of this restaurant, of her life. And in the grand scheme of things, one waiter's ignorant remark wasn't going to affect her. But as she sat there, quietly savoring her drink and her thoughts, Karoline knew that this moment, small as it was, had given her a chance to reflect on the kind of leader she was and the importance of treating everyone with respect, no matter their status. As her meal arrived, she smiled to herself, realizing that the night had taken an unexpected turn. Sometimes the best lessons came in the most unlikely of places. For now, Karoline would enjoy the quiet evening, knowing that she had the power to rise above, and that the world outside would never truly understand the full story behind the woman who owned the restaurant where they dined. As the evening wore on, Karoline began to feel the irritation growing beneath the surface. She had come to the restaurant to unwind and enjoy a peaceful meal, but the waiter, Jason, seemed intent on making her experience uncomfortable. At first, she had chalked up his behavior to nervousness, thinking perhaps he was just trying too hard to impress. However, as time passed, his comments began to feel less like attempts to help and more like thinly veiled insults. After her initial interaction with him, Karoline had ordered the salmon, which she enjoyed, But Jason had continued to hover, making pointed remarks about the dishes she chose. Each comment felt like a little jab, meant to undermine her taste or knowledge of food. It wasn't enough for him to simply take the order and serve it. No, Jason needed to make his presence known, to assert his so-called expertise, even if it meant belittling her. Jason came by again to check on her, and this time he was carrying an air of self-importance. He leaned in, his voice low and condescending. "You know, the salmon is a solid choice. It pairs well with a light, crisp white wine. But if you really want to elevate your experience, I'd suggest you try something a little more adventurous. You might want to step outside your comfort zone next time." Karoline blinked, surprised by his audacity. She had been ordering meals at fine restaurants for years, and her palate was well developed. She had spent countless evenings with sommeliers, discussing wine pairings with expert chefs, but Jason had no idea. To him, she was just another customer, perhaps another rich person who didn't know what they were doing. "Oh, I'm sure it's a nice wine pairing," she said, her tone polite but cool. "I've had it before." Jason didn't take the hint. In fact, he seemed to take her response as a challenge. "Well, maybe you don't know the best choices for a meal like this," he said with an overly serious expression. "Some people don't really understand wine pairing. They just drink what they like, you know. I'm just trying to make sure you're getting the most out of your meal for someone like you." The words stung, though Karoline tried her best to keep her face neutral. The idea that he was treating her like someone who didn't know how to properly enjoy a meal made her blood boil. She didn't engage with him right away, instead choosing to sip her wine slowly and appreciate the delicate balance of flavors. She had worked too hard to let this young waiter disrupt her evening, but Jason didn't stop there. Every time he returned to her table, he seemed to try to one-up her, to show that he knew better than she did. When he came back with her next course, a perfectly cooked duck breast with a rich, glossy sauce, he launched into another lecture. "That duck is great," he began, eyes scanning her plate as though he were an expert. "But you might not be able to appreciate it the way others do. Some people find the flavors a little overwhelming, you know. You have to really have a sophisticated palate to enjoy a dish like that. I'm sure you'll manage, though." Karoline's patience was starting to fray, but she did her best to keep it in check. She had learned long ago that confrontation rarely yielded results, especially when someone was too full of themselves to listen. Still, there was something deeply infuriating about the way Jason was treating her, assuming that her taste in food and wine could be dictated by him, someone who didn't even know who she was. Jason's tone was so dismissive that it was almost as if he believed he was the one doing her a favor. And yet, it became clear that he had no idea what he was dealing with. If he had only known that Karoline wasn't just any guest, but the owner of the restaurant, the very person who had designed the menu, hired the chefs, and spent sleepless nights ensuring the experience was exceptional, he might have been a little more careful in his words. But he didn't know, and that was exactly what Karoline chose to her advantage. She continued to smile politely, choosing to let his condescension roll off her. She didn't need to prove herself to him. Instead, she focused on enjoying the meal she had chosen, savoring each bite, letting the rich flavors of the duck and the subtle notes of the wine wash over her. But the more Jason undermined her, the more Karoline's frustration grew. She had been calm and composed up until now, but it was becoming harder to ignore his behavior. The fact that he was doing this to her, someone who had worked tirelessly to build this restaurant from the ground up, felt like an insult not only to her but to the hard work of every person behind the scenes who contributed to the restaurant's success. As the evening wore on, Jason's behavior became increasingly intolerable. It wasn't just his remarks about the food. It was the way he looked at her, as though he saw her as nothing more than an easy target, someone he could condescend to and lecture, because he assumed she was just another wealthy patron with no knowledge of dining. Finally, as he came to check on her meal again, his words were dripping with arrogance. "You seem to be enjoying the food," he said, his tone implying that he was surprised she could actually appreciate the cuisine. "I guess you've learned to appreciate the finer things in life, even if it's a little beyond what you're used to." That was the breaking point. Karoline set her fork down with deliberate slowness. She took a deep breath, her calm demeanor betraying the storm brewing inside. She raised her gaze to meet his, no longer hiding the irritation that had been building. All evening, she wasn't just a diner, she was the one who had made this place what it was. "Jason," she said, her voice firm but composed, "I've owned this restaurant for several years now. I know exactly what I'm doing when it comes to food and wine pairing. I've been in this industry long enough to know the difference between a genuine recommendation and a condescending lecture." Jason's face went pale, the realization slowly dawning on him. He stammered out an apology, his confidence evaporating. Karoline, however, was no longer interested in hearing it. "I think you need to learn that treating people with respect is far more important than showing off what you think you know. Do you understand?" she asked, her tone still calm but carrying a weight that left no room for argument. Jason nodded quickly, too embarrassed to say anything more. Karoline stood up, leaving a generous tip despite the tension of the evening. As she walked out of the restaurant, she realized that sometimes it wasn't about confronting every misstep. Sometimes the best lesson came from letting someone know calmly and decisively that they had underestimated you. It wasn't until Jason brought the bill that the true nature of the situation revealed itself. Karoline had been quietly reflecting on the events of the evening, letting the moments of frustration settle in her mind. She had already decided not to engage with the petty remarks Jason had made, at least not until now. As he placed the check on the table, his smug smile made her blood boil, even though she had tried to remain calm up until this point. "I'm sure you'll be leaving a generous tip for such an amazing experience, won't you?" Jason said with an air of superiority, as though he had just provided some unparalleled service. He didn't realize how misguided his confidence was. He assumed that the comments he had made, the insults he had offered, had gone unnoticed. He assumed that Karoline, like so many others, would simply nod along and leave the tip with a smile, likely to reinforce his assumption that he could speak down to people without any consequences. But this time, it was the final straw. Karoline's anger, which had been simmering beneath the surface all evening, finally bubbled over. Her patience, once as calm as the gentle ripples of a tranquil lake, had reached its breaking point. She took a deep breath, her eyes narrowing as she set her glass down with deliberate slowness. The evening had been filled with slight remarks, passive-aggressive jabs, and moments of condescension. But this was the moment when Jason crossed a line that Karoline wasn't willing to ignore anymore. "Jason," she said, her voice calm but firm, "I think it's time we had a little chat." Jason's face shifted instantly from smug self-assurance to confusion. His eyes widened slightly, unsure of what was coming. For a brief moment he wondered if he had somehow misread the situation, but he didn't know how to react. His nerves began to show as he stood there, still holding the bill in his hand, clearly uncomfortable. Karoline stood up from the table, her posture straight, every step measured with intent. Without waiting for his response, she turned and walked toward the back of the restaurant, expecting Jason to follow. Jason, still bewildered, did just that. He didn't know where this conversation was going, but he followed Karoline down the hallway toward the staff area, where the rest of the team worked quietly in the kitchen or prepping for the next service. The atmosphere in the back of the restaurant was busy but still calm, an environment of hard work and concentration. But Jason's mind was anything but focused. His stomach was churning, and he felt a knot form in his throat. What was about to happen? As Karoline led him into the back office, she closed the door behind her. Jason stood there waiting for her to speak, the quiet tension in the room rising between them. Karoline didn't waste time. She turned toward him, locking eyes with a steady gaze that made him feel both small and exposed. "Do you know who I am?" Karoline asked, her voice calm but carrying an undeniable edge. It was a simple question, but it held immense weight. Jason, still unsure of what was happening, stammered, I'm not sure." Karoline didn't give him time to finish his sentence. "I am the owner of this restaurant," she said, her words sharp and clear, echoing in the small office. "This is my business, and I'm afraid you've made a mistake assuming I'm just another guest." The words hit Jason like a ton of bricks. His face immediately turned pale, and he felt the blood drain from his face. His heart skipped a beat as the realization set in. He had just spent the entire evening insulting the owner of the restaurant, without even realizing who she was. The woman he had condescended to, the one he had treated like an ignorant customer, was the very person who held the keys to the place he worked. The weight of his mistake hit him hard, and he struggled to find the words to apologize. I'm so sorry," Jason stammered, his voice trembling with the mix of embarrassment and fear. "I didn't know. I didn't mean to. I was just trying to do my job. I didn't know who you were." Karoline's expression remained stoic, but inside, she was already preparing herself for how to handle the situation. She wasn't one to easily lash out, but she wasn't about to let this kind of behavior slide. She had worked far too hard to build this restaurant to let anyone treat her or any of her guests this way. Jason's behavior was unprofessional, disrespectful, and downright inappropriate. It wasn't just about the momentary insult. It was about the lack of regard for the people who made the restaurant what it was. "Your job, Jason, is not just to serve food," Karoline said, her tone calm but filled with authority. "Your job is to treat everyone, no matter who they are, with respect. It doesn't matter if they're wealthy or not. It doesn't matter if they own the restaurant or are just a guest. Every person who comes through that door deserves respect, and you failed to provide that." Jason stood there ashamed as Karoline's words cut through the tension like a knife. He had misjudged her completely. He had assumed she was just another woman who didn't know anything about fine dining, assuming that he, as the waiter, was somehow in a position to lecture her. But now, with the truth out in the open, he saw how far off the mark he had been. "I've spent years building this restaurant," Karoline continued, her voice steady and unwavering. "It's not just about the food or the wine. It's about the experience. It's about making people feel welcome, appreciated, and valued. When you treat someone like you did tonight, you undermine everything this restaurant stands for. That's not the standard I hold here." Jason's eyes were downcast, his face flushed with embarrassment. He knew he had messed up. He had insulted the very person who had made it all possible. "I understand," Jason said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do better. I promise I'll never treat anyone like that again." Karoline took a deep breath, her anger dissipating. There was no need for further confrontation. She knew that Jason was young and had made a grave mistake, but he was also willing to learn. That was all she could ask for. "I'm giving you a chance to correct your behavior. You don't need to apologize to me, but I hope you'll take this lesson seriously. You may never know who you're dealing with, and it's essential to treat everyone with dignity and respect." Jason nodded, his head still lowered in humility. Karoline gave him a brief, measured look before turning to leave. She knew this conversation would stay with him for a long time, maybe longer than it would stay with her. As she walked back toward the dining area, Karoline felt a sense of resolve. This was her restaurant, her passion, and no one was going to take that away from her. This night had been an unfortunate lesson, but it had also been an opportunity to remind herself of the power of patience, grace, and respect. Sometimes the hardest lessons came from the most unexpected places. The next time Karoline dined at her restaurant, she would no longer be just a quiet, anonymous guest. She would be the woman who would set the standard for the kind of experience every person who walked through the door deserved, a place where respect and excellence went hand in hand. Jason's apology was sincere, but it was clear the damage had already been done. As he stood in the back office, his face still flushed with embarrassment, Karoline could see the regret in his eyes. His stammered words didn't change the fact that he had crossed a line, one that no professional in the service industry should ever cross. Still, Karoline didn't let her frustration boil over into anger. The evening had already been emotionally taxing for both of them, and while she had every right to be furious, she chose a different path. Karoline could have made a scene. She could have raised her voice, embarrassed Jason in front of the other staff, and let him feel the full weight of his mistake. Or perhaps even more dramatically, she could have fired him on the spot. It would have been an easy solution, one that would give her immediate satisfaction and send a clear message. After all, he had insulted her, undermined her knowledge, and, in essence, disrespected the restaurant she had worked so hard to build. But instead of choosing the more dramatic route, Karoline took a step back and decided to approach the situation from a place of understanding and growth. She saw an opportunity to teach, a chance to impart the values she held so dear, not only for herself but for every person working in her restaurant. She wasn't interested in adding fuel to an already tense situation. Instead, Karoline used the moment to help Jason realize the importance of treating every person with respect, no matter their background, wealth, or social status. It was a life lesson she believed was worth more than any confrontation. "Jason," Karoline began, her voice steady and calm, "I appreciate your apology. But what's more important right now is understanding why it happened in the first place. I'm not upset because of the remarks you made about the food or the wine pairing. What I'm upset about is the way you treated me, and, more importantly, the way you treat the guests in this restaurant." Jason stood there, his head bowed, listening intently. He knew he had made a mistake, and now he was ready to understand why his behavior had been so out of line. Karoline's calm demeanor allowed him to reflect on his actions without feeling more defensive. She wasn't there to tear him down, but to build him up, to show him the better way to handle himself. "Everyone who comes here deserves respect," Karoline continued, her words measured but powerful. "It doesn't matter if they're wealthy or not. It doesn't matter if they know the difference between a Chardonnay and a Pinot Noir, or if they've ever stepped foot in a fine dining restaurant before. Every person who walks through that door is important, and you need to remember that." She paused for a moment, giving Jason the time to absorb the gravity of what she was saying. Karoline wasn't simply lecturing him, she was planting the seeds of empathy and respect. "It's not about the size of the bill or the type of wine they ordered," she went on. "It's about dignity and kindness. You are here to make their experience exceptional, not judge them. Your job is not to be the authority on their taste, it's to help them feel valued and cared for." Jason, still visibly embarrassed, nodded slowly, his expression softening. The weight of Karoline's words was beginning to settle in, and for the first time that evening, he felt the full impact of his actions. He was truly sorry for how he had treated her, and for how he might have made her feel less than. "I understand," he said quietly. "I really didn't mean to make you feel that way. I've always tried to give the best service I can. But I guess I got carried away tonight. I'll do better, I promise." Karoline smiled faintly, relieved that Jason was beginning to grasp the significance of what she had said. "It's not about perfection, Jason. It's about trying every day to be better. And that starts with how you treat people, every person, every time." Her voice was gentle but firm, a reminder of the core values that had brought her to this point in life. She paused before continuing. "This restaurant is my passion. It's my livelihood. But more than that, it's a place for people to come together and enjoy something special. Every single person who steps through those doors, whether they're here for an anniversary dinner or a quiet meal alone, deserves to feel welcome, respected, and appreciated. That's what hospitality is all about." Karoline's voice softened as she made her final point. "I want you to remember that, Jason. The next time someone walks through those doors, I want you to treat them like they matter, because they do. And you matter too. You're part of what makes this place what it is. But in order to do that, you have to understand the power of empathy and humility. Everyone has a story. Everyone has value." Jason was quiet for a moment, processing everything Karoline had shared. He knew that he had been arrogant and dismissive, not just toward Karoline, but toward the very spirit of hospitality that had made the restaurant a success. He wasn't just a server, he was an ambassador for the restaurant, and his job was to ensure that each guest left with a sense of satisfaction and respect. "I really do appreciate this," Jason said, finally meeting Karoline's eyes. "You're right. I lost sight of what this place is all about, and I let my ego get in the way. I won't forget what you said. Thank you for giving me the chance to learn from this." Karoline nodded, feeling the weight of the moment lift. "I'm glad you understand. It's easy to make mistakes, Jason. What matters is what you do after you make them. Take this as an opportunity to grow and don't repeat it again." With that, Karoline gave him a warm but no-nonsense smile, signaling that the conversation was over. She wasn't looking for a dramatic ending. She just wanted to ensure that Jason had learned something valuable. As she walked back into the main dining area, Karoline couldn't help but reflect on the lesson she had imparted. She had chosen to handle the situation with grace, not because she was above confrontation, but because she knew that showing patience and empathy would leave a far greater impression than any confrontation could. She had the power to elevate the situation, to help Jason see his mistake and learn from it. And in doing so, she had helped him become a better person. The lesson here is simple. Kindness and respect go a long way in life, no matter where you're sitting at the table. It doesn't matter your position, your wealth, or your background. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. And sometimes, when you least expect it, a simple encounter can remind us all of the power of empathy and humility. So, the next time you think you know someone, remember, appearances can be deceiving. Always treat others with the respect they deserve, because you never know who you might be talking to.